Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Evagnoni.
bringing you this week's Living Ascension. So many of us, especially on what we would call an active spiritual journey, have been feeling nothing. For lack of a better word, right? It's been
You can elaborate and say emptiness.
Emptiness, lack of direction, lack of feeling pulled to do something, or, like stopping, like the pull of doing something is stopped, like that you've been doing for a while. And that can even be this kind of work. It can be almost anything. It can be life in general. And
Right.
more and more. Avoid. Yes. Good morning, Yashmin. And so what we do is we get caught up in these egoic internal struggles of so I'm already yawning. So that means this is a big one, right?
Right.
All the internal struggles of, you should be doing this. You should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this. And why aren't you doing this? And, and it's like, but then when you really sit with it in that presence, right, which we've talked about so much in the past month, it's like, well, yeah, no, this is just be, right? Just be right now.
Right.
And
it's almost like sitting in the presence with something like that you feel that pull towards. It almost like satisfies that pull to where it's like, oh, okay, I'm done with that then, I guess.
Yeah. Or it's not even being done with it. It's almost like just a different relationship with it that you get.
That's better. Almost like a peace with it, to where there's not a need associated with it.
Yes. And so that's confusing because we are so unused to running that way in this set of, dimensions. So, I can't even stop already.
Yeah, it's almost like it's that energetic to-do list that we're used to being driven by.
Well, and we're used to being pulled in a very clear way, right? And it's either even by the ego, right? So the ego wants to pull you here and pull you there, but the more we become present with what the ego wants, we realize that it's all the ego, right? And we realize that it's all superficial, or it's based on these imaginary sets of lack or beliefs of lack and all this kind of stuff, right? So we avoid stuff, we go towards stuff. The biggest, deepest habit that we have is that's how we are getting propelled, right? We get propelled through avoidance of, lack, or running away from lack, or wanting to attain something that we believe we don't have.
Right.
To prove ourselves worthy, to prove ourselves, valuable in this set of dimensions. And when we lose that, we sort of lose our identity in it of, well, now what? Right. So it's funny because I had lunch with a really good friend, a spiritual tribe of ours, last week that I see on a regular basis. And she basically said, I feel lost. She goes, and yet I don't feel lost. She goes, it's not like anything's bad. She's like, but I'm not. She goes, I feel empty, right? I feel undirected. I feel like I don't have a pull or a direction or a purpose.
That alone is unsettling.
Right. That's the unsettling part, right? Because then ego, but then what am I? What am I? And who am I? And then we scramble to try to find something and say, well, maybe it's something new, something else that I need to be or do. And it's like, what if it's just to be? And she goes, yeah, every time I ask, all I get is just be.
Right.
And she's like, and it's making me crazy because it's like, well, I've got to be here to do something besides just be it. I'm like, but maybe we're not.
Right. I mean, we have been, with the spiritual awakening, it's like a mission, and it's been, the talk and the education and the expansion, but it's still doing.
Yes.
And it's almost like we've come to a place of, okay, we've done that. Now it's time to be that,
Yes.
or simply be in that energy.
Well, and we were, and the conversation flowed into, what if we are just here to be, like, what if we're here just to be the embodiment of joy and to live every day as we wish, as we, like, can best express that joy, whatever that is today. And today it could be making something, or baking something, or completing something, or helping somebody, right?
Or experiencing something.
Or just being in nature, it can be a million things, right? But then tomorrow it can be something completely different. And what if we stayed with that kind of fluidity, right? And so like the ego goes, no, because I need a linear definition of who I am every moment of every day. Like, and I
need structure.
Yes. I need structure. I need to control. I need to organize.
I need to be able to have milestones so I can judge my success or failure. Which is
the whole perspective of lack, right? And it's even, okay, those of us watching this who are all on the spiritual, active spiritual path, even the concept of how am I here to serve? Which is the big one that we hide. We hide that from the ego. We think that's not egoic, and yet it is.
Right.
Because the implication is the only value we provide is by serving.
Right.
By giving ourselves away.
And the majority of that is it's depleting.
Right.
Not nourishing.
Right. Right. And so when we fully shift our lives to the self-nourishment, right? And to the passion-fed life, right? The soul-fed life, the heart-fed life. It's like living in it's existing in a completely different way, which we don't even know how to do that.
Right. Michael says, if we go out of our routine path, will it be like that movie, The Truman Show, where we will find a boundary to the matrix?
Maybe. I remember that, The Truman Show. Yep.
Right.
And if you go, again, I will mention this movie again, Everything
I
Everywhere.
did finally watch it.
You did watch it?
I did.
Isn't it great though? It's totally an embodiment of all of this, right? And at the same time, it's fun, right? It's bittersweet, it's fun. So if you haven't watched it, anybody's watching or listening, I mean, this is a great example of like what we're talking about, of like everything all comes together, being completely present, right? Yasmin said, love that movie. Yeah. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Fabulous. But I think I'll have to buy that one, even though I don't buy a lot of movies. It's like that one will go along on, in my digital shelf with the Matrix movies and stuff.
Right.
And sliding doors. But the thing is, so here's the funny part. So we had the whole conversation, and no, it wasn't Friday, it was last Wednesday, and we were having lunch, and we're talking about, being present and being that in that fluidity, and what if that's what it is. And we had this whole talk about all this other stuff, and we were laughing, and I said, but that's maybe the whole purpose is laughing, and that's coming back to our natural sense of bliss, right? And smiling and allowing ourselves joy, right? And letting that joy be easy, because in the past we've thought, oh, it needs to be well earned, right? We can only get joy from earning something or completing something. Like we award ourselves for attaining something, a goal or whatever, instead of saying, I can't have it right now, right?
Right. And I know personally, I used to save all my creative outlets as like, I can't do that until I accomplish these things.
Right.
And that ensured that I never got there, because, things like dishes and laundry and grocery shopping, you're never done. You're never finished.
There's always more. Yes.
There's always more. And as time goes on, it just repeats itself. And so as I've shifted to make that my primary and the laundry and the groceries and the cooking and the cleaning and everything falls later, what a difference in my life.
Yes.
It's
Well,
I don't want to say it's a rearranging. It's almost like an inside out.
it's an inside out, and it's a reprioritization, right? So
Right.
it's like when we talk about so here's a little thing, and you and I have talked about this many times on this, but like, when people say, well, I'm just too busy, I can't get to that. When I have that conversation with someone, I say, well, the thing to really look at without judgment is it's really not a priority.
Exactly.
That means everything else is a priority over that, which is why I don't get to it. So it's not,
Right.
oh, I'm so sorry, I can't do this, or I really would like to do this, but I just can't seem to get to it. It's like, nope. Take ownership and self-responsibility, which we have a whole course on. Self-responsibility in our reality is saying, yeah, well, instead of saying I can't get to it, it's not a priority of mine. Because it's funny, as soon as you say that out loud, all of a sudden you have to step back and think and go, wait a minute. So it really isn't a priority of mine to take care of myself, or to nourish myself, or to do something that sort of, right.
Well, and the important thing there is in addition to taking that responsibility, which this is another one of our courses, is to not judge it.
Yeah.
And that gets into the whole forgiveness of, because you have judged it.
Yep. Yeah. And so it's really, this is a big one, and it sounds really simple, which it is, except we feel lost without propulsion, because we are so addicted to that in this sense of density here.
Well, and we're on that drive to destination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is more about experiencing, and you lose time, and that destination just goes away.
Yeah.
Because it's not linear.
Yeah. Well, and we say things like, well, I'm not going to do this until this. I won't do this until I have this much money in the bank. I won't do this until this. I won't, well, then we're still denying ourselves, right? Instead of saying, which I have learned many times, if I feel it, do it, and the universe will conspire to support it. If it comes from the heart, right? If it comes from my truth, kind of thing. So finishing that whole thing up with the lunch is like, so we were talking about that and the easy joy, whatever. And the funniest part about that was when we got up to leave, I went to the bathroom, and our friend left, and she texted me like as I was walking out to my car, and she says, look at the license plate on the car next to yours. As I was walking up to my car, I was like, all right. So I look, and the license plate said Easy Joy. And I thought, could that not have been a funnier, more direct message, especially after we just had that conversation? So I was like, apparently that's our takeaway for today.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's the thing, is easy joy, right? Living easy joy. And then the funny thing is, my license plate is limitless. So it was limitless and easy joy right next to each other, which I think is very cool. But, we can choose easy joy. And the thing is, when we take away our connection to propulsions, right? Like I can only do this, and when I do this, which means I have to move toward it or away from this or whatever. And we just say, how about I'm just here joyful as the divine embodied as I am right now, in gratitude for everything I experience. And then, and even as I say that, though, the ego's screaming in the back of the head going, well, what do we do then? What do we do?
Right. Well, and, we can tie this back to so many topics we've talked about, and how, each person is on their own journey. And if they connect to their own version of joy and joyfulness, it adds to that richness. Mm-hmm. And it adds to the notes in the symphony of the universe and the multiverse. And it just creates that complexity that we've been seeking in the doing. Mm-hmm. And it takes just coming to that place of presence and connecting into that joy, and allowing others to do the same without judgment. And then allowing that interaction, it really, I don't know, I just see it as we talk about the concentric rings or the spiral out. It changes the scenery along that spiral.
Yes. Well, and it continues on the topic from last week, right? Which was the heart, like learning to live heart-based versus mind-based, because the mind-based is from the ego. And it's sort of like the mind-based is very linear, as we were talking about, and then the heart-based is very non-linear, right? And it's sort of like, and it's uncomfortable, right? Because we're so used to linearity, because we can control this. The ego can control linearity, right? And say, well, because
we're comfortable with it. We're comfortable with it.
Right. And it's, well, because there's logic to that. And logic is this happens, this happens, this happens, and then this happens. Well,
and that predictability and belief that we have control.
Right. Which is then a comfort zone. Right.
Right.
Until you pull, and it's sort of like, it was funny. We were talking to somebody, my husband and I were talking to somebody, like not this weekend, but last weekend, about scuba diving and whatever. And it's like, the biggest thing in scuba diving that's a very interesting thing to notice is nonlinearity, right? Because you're used to on land with gravity. When you're looking for somebody, you're looking in front, behind, to the side, right? And you get in the water, and now you have this dynamic of they're over you, under you. You have like all other dimensional like places that they could be. And you're like, okay, well, you have to sort of become you have to sense in a different way, or pay attention in a different way. Right. Of not only people around you, but the reefs and the fish and like what's around you in all these dimensions.
It's almost like being in space.
Yes, it is.
But within this.
Yes. So then it's like, so that's right. Because we're used to very linear, because we use the gravity thing of walking, like just walking on the ground, and then using that as like sort of our baseline, and then everything else is built off of that. So, but that's a very small example though of changing our linearity, because when we take linearity out, then we just, that's where the ego gets all freaked out, because it's like, well, where do I look?
Right.
I don't know where to look. I don't know looking.
And how do I behave?
Right.
How do I behave, and how do I be successful in this?
Mm-hmm.
Because
we're used to looking. So here's the thing. The thing, where do I look, is, well, how do we compare ourselves? What's the person next to me doing? Who's the person in line in front of me? Or, like what's the person in like traffic with me doing? Or what's the person at work doing with me? Or what's the other person in my relationship doing? Like all that kind of stuff. And we're used to this comparative. And that's a linear way of thinking, versus being, choosing based on your being, not on what to do. And that's a completely different, it's a completely different way of existing. And we thought we had it, but it's like we are at a collective shifting that. And I feel like that's where everybody's going, huh? Like, I feel lost.
Right. And we judge that feeling, which, is the ego creatively inserting itself and saying, no, I need to control this again so that we can feel comfortable and connected. Right.
Yeah. No, because when we say, where are we? It's like, well, I want to define it on the line.
Right.
It needs to fit on my line of existence. And it's funny, because when we work in consciousness, right, in vision, what I call vision work or anything like that, all vision work really is, anybody who goes to a psychic or whatever, right? So we do that kind of work too, but we don't call it psychic work, because it's simply consciousness work. It's simply pulling ourselves out of linearity to see everything at once. And that's where you see the whole picture. That's the same thing. There's no difference. So we're not actually, it's not per se seeing the future. It's seeing the whole picture.
It's seeing all of right now
without the linearity of time.
Right.
Which makes, so then you can just see everything. And it makes it very clear. It's very easy to see, because then what happens is you start seeing, and I've never had the words until recently on how to explain that, because people are like, well, how do you see this, or how do you understand this? And it's like, well, I just see it in a snapshot. That's all I would say. And it's like, but the snapshot is outside of space and time, and you see the whole picture in completion, which means all the time stuff is incorporated into that, right?
Right. Right.
So it's variable depending on different variables in the bigger picture. So it's a tricky, I want to say tricky. It's tricky to the ego because the ego is just, it's just not a common thing for us to manage that way. And people in the past who have been able to do that have been called, weird, evil, or psychotic, witches, psychotic, right?
Right.
Schizophrenic.
Right.
When I was first, that was what I was afraid of when I was first having my, like, what I would have called my grand awakening, was being, because I was suddenly able to see and understand all of these things like that. And it was like, you want to say hearing voices, but it's like you see the whole thing. Then you think,
Right.
am I schizophrenic? And it's like, well, I have a different perspective on what people define as mental illness today, because
Absolutely.
Because is it mental illness or is it mental
Just outside of what you believe is normal.
Yeah. Mental differentness.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, it's funny. I've had people come to me over the years and be like, I hear voices, and they think, they've been put on medication because I heard voices. And I'm like, so did anybody ask you what the voices were saying? Because that would be an indicator of a lot of things.
Right. Right.
Like, just because you hear voices doesn't mean diddly.
Right.
So all of this ties back into this feeling of being lost, this feeling of murkiness right now that is individual as well as collective, to bring it back to around to the whole collective idea, because,
Well, and like we talked on Friday about how actually that feeling of emptiness is, if you look at it and relabel it as, well, this is my creative void, and everything lies within here, all potential. It takes it changes our judgment of emptiness.
mm-hmm.
Because emptiness feels like, sad, and that's what immediately comes to my mind. Depression, something's missing.
There's a lot of that going around.
Right. That feeling of I don't belong here anymore. Something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Versus it's an open book. It's a blank page.
Yes.
And what goes on that page is totally up to you. Which if you
every moment.
Right. And if you shift that, and for me, it was like a tweak, not a huge, revelation of I have to totally change the way I think about things. It was a small adjustment, but the impact was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibilities, just instead of being there are none to they are limitless.
Yeah. Well, and when you feel your nowness, when you feel your presence with that infinite possibility, right?
Right.
Then you're not sitting there worrying about 20 years from now. You're not worrying about next week or tomorrow. You're just in that place. And what's funny is, after we had that discussion on Friday, I noticed this weekend, I actually went in the other direction for like a 24-hour period. Like, suddenly it was almost like my ego went into this panic of no, you can't let go of this, because you have to worry about this and this and this. And it was almost, I was like, where did this come from? I haven't had this kind of like worry in the back of my head for I don't know how long. And it was like, it wasn't until yesterday I was like, oh, you're just panicking because I'm letting go of all, because my whole thing is, oh yeah, I'm going to let go of this, or I'm letting go of it. And it's like, well, what if there is no tomorrow? I mean, truly.
Right.
What if there's no next week? What if it is all about, we talk about living life for the moment. We talk about that. How many of us really do it? Because we judge it. How much can I live life for the moment? How much, like how many people I've known in the past 10 years who have literally just sold everything, got rid of everything, and upped and left and just changed their entire life. Many. And not one of them regretted it. Not one.
Right. Well, and take it to the extreme where people talk about on your deathbed, you're not going to say, "Oh, I wish I'd worked more," or "I wish I'd worried more." That
Right.
doesn't happen.
Michael
That
says,
just doesn't
I know,
happen.
Michael says, what's the point of just going through the motions? Exactly, because it's, I guess, like, and I've said this before, I had this whole perspective that came to me early on in doing this work. And it was, okay, so, people talk about, like you see those stories of people having like given 6 months to live, or the bucket list movie, or, okay, so you've got this much time. So now do the stuff that you always want to do. And it's like, why not just do it now? Like, why do we wait?
Right. Right.
And it's funny because I went through this whole thing of, and I've talked to so many about this, where it's like, okay, so we are changing really rapidly, right? Some of us are done doing this version of of an individual after this lifetime.
Right.
And so like we're getting close, or either you're one of the last or at the last, and I sort of got I got that insight a long time ago that this is probably my last time doing this way, right? Because I've done
Right.
1,000 lives or whatever and just done all of it. And so if you say that, it's no different than saying, okay, so you have 4 weeks to live. If you say, I've done 1,000 lives and this is your last one doing this, why don't you just have fun? Why don't you just enjoy the journey this time?
Right. Focus on the joy.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, and if we all sort of looked at it that way and said, okay, but then also just focus on everything in the reality that you have, and recognize that somehow, as miserable as it might present itself to the ego, you enjoy it, or else you wouldn't be creating it.
Right. Right. Which, really reframes everything into that perspective of joy.
Yeah. Yeah. And say, okay, where do I find the joy in this? And some people will say, I don't find the joy in anything. It's like, but when we start to like, we've created the epic journey, right? We love the story. We love the story. We love the dramatic story. We love,
and the more complex, the more we love it.
Right.
Which is why everything right now is we're recognizing the interconnectivity of everything.
Right.
Which is a reflection of how complex we've made this to show the magnitude of our power.
Absolutely. And so when we see the beauty, because I'll say more and more when I go out there and I can see that, it's breathtaking.
It really is.
And when I can see how, like, so more and more I've noticed over the past several years, like I can see like a big picture of something and have no desire to change it, right? Just to see it, because I just see the whole picture and I see the beauty in its symphony within itself. Right.
Right.
And that's the finding joy in it. That's the finding joy in every moment. But then of course the ego kicks back in, is like, what are we doing? What are we doing to prove ourselves? Where's our value?
Hello. Snap back into worrying about the future.
What's the matter? Yeah. Like, you got to worry about next week or next. That's what happened this weekend for, like I said, a 24-hour period. And I was like, I finally was like, what the heck? And it was funny because what snapped me out of it was a discussion I had with my husband, who was saying something about like, well, I've been thinking about, how to manage this or how to do this in like 20 years or whatever. And I'm like, who the hell cares? We want to be here in 20 years.
Right.
I'm like, how about today? How about we just focus on today? How about we focus on what's the best of today?
Yeah.
And what works for today. It might not work for tomorrow.
Right. I know personally, we've been facing a rezoning happening like in our backyard. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, well, they leased it back to this Montessori school for 20 years. And the other people in the meeting were like, but what after the 20 years? And I was like, oh, I can't even, I'm not going there. Because to me, that just seems like another lifetime away.
20 years, seriously. I mean,
Right.
a year ago seems like a lifetime away right
Right.
now, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. And we get so stuck and so obsessive about this. And it's funny because somebody that I know, there's another conversation I had within the last couple of weeks, and the person that I know had texted me out of nowhere, and she just hit 50 and was like, somebody I've known for a long time. And she's like, and I'm just like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do in retiring and this and that? I'm like, are you retiring? I mean, this is somebody who's just found her heart and is loving every day of what she's doing. And I'm like, why do you, it's like the ego has to say, we can't love this too much because we've got to worry.
Right.
Stop not worrying.
Well, and the way I always looked at retirement was that was when you got to do all the things that you wouldn't allow yourself to do because you were working.
Right.
So what if you turned your work into everything that you love to do?
Right. Then you never have to retire.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's funny because that was part of the conversation that we had. It was a texting conversation. I said, honestly, I don't even think about that. I said, because I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, and I'm in my 50s. So, like it changes, it's changing every year. It's changing every day. It's changing every week, And I said, and really what the question that comes to me to ask you is, are you enjoying your life right now?
Right. Right.
And she's like, well, that's what I asked myself. And and it was good because it caused her to let go of something that did not align with the joy. And she goes, and I did, and I'm letting go of this so I could just do this. And I said, good, great. Stop worrying about 25 years from now.
Well, and I think we're getting to the point energetically that as the earth continues to shift through what it's going to, it no longer allows that, well, I'm just going to suck it up and do this. It's going to become so uncomfortable and it just falls apart. Yep. No matter how hard you try.
Yep.
To where you get to the point where those things that are incongruent with your vibration just disintegrate no matter what you do. And if you allow that, and then that creates that void that we've been talking about, and then fill it or allow that joy to just be recognized within that, things flow.
What we had talked about when we got to the void thing, because I said, oh, it was interesting because when we were having the conversation, I was like, well, it's like there's a big void. It's like so to get to the technical explanation of it, right? It's like we've cleared out so much individually and collectively that now we feel like there's this big void that was being filled up with the energy of all this other stuff, right?
Right.
And this is what a lot of us are feeling. So then the ego's compulsion is to fill the void, right? Because the ego believes in duality, that there's got to be balance and the void cannot exist. It's got to be filled, right?
Right. I mean, if you think about it, the ego thinks of the void as like a vacuum. Like I've got to fill that space.
Yes. Yeah.
Or something will fill it for me.
Yes.
And I have to control it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because that instills fear, right? Because it could be something that, and it's like, well, if we're breaking the addiction, right, we have to look at the fact that, well, we're addicted to having to fill the void. What if we allowed the void to exist? And then we recognize the void as the void of infinite possibility. And I feel like and that's what that was the point we wanted to make sure we covered today on that. Because when we're like, so here's the thing, the insight that came to us, it's like, so before we had so much stuff, right? So many triggers and duality-based things, right? Anger and emotions and things that we're holding on to, that when we would clear, say, a couple of things, right? It would leave a void, but then we had enough of the stuff over here that it still caused a propulsion so that we knew what to head toward in the void. Well, then as we clear the playing field even more and we do even more clearing, well, then that gives us more void, space and less propulsion. And then the ego is freaking out because it's like, okay, I would keep myself content before knowing I had propulsion from other things. But as we're letting go of all these things, what do I do? And that's that feeling of feeling lost and undirected and like you're floating in space, but you know, like, and you feel like you're wasting your life or wasting who you are, or blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh no, you're just remembering that void of infinite possibility, because then all of a sudden, instead of just these possibilities that you allow because of before you had these limitations that you were imposing on yourself, right? Now you have all of these possibilities and it's overwhelming, right? To
Right.
the ego.
Right.
Because the
Right.
ego goes, oh, well, it's the right choice. Like what? They're all the right choice. We create all of them. When you watch the movie, the Everything Everywhere All at Once, like you see that, like we make all the choices. We make all the
Right.
choices. We just don't
Yashmin
remember
says
them.
that makes so much sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we were like, oh, that was our aha moment on Friday when we were talking about
Right.
this. And we're like, right. So when we realize and recognize we not only don't make just one choice, that we do it all, right?
Right.
It's just what we remember in this moment. And when we start to call it back to our memory in this moment, right, the ego sort of gets overwhelmed. But then it's like, what if we allowed it to all come back together, and then we could see the hologram instead of just the linearity, right?
Right. Right.
And then that's
And
a new
that brings a
playground.
whole different level of contentment as well.
Oh, totally, totally. And it's if we allow it to be overwhelming, it can be, but it is an infinite expansion of our remembrance while we're embodied. So we can rewire ourselves to be able to allow that
Right.
in our consciousness and still function here while we're existing. But it's a different functioning. It's a completely different functioning.
So
Yeah.
to support that,
Yep.
to support that, what is it that the clearing? I mean, there's so much. This is such a like you said, simple, but so contrary to how we're habituated.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that connection to joy is really, really critical here.
Well, and presence, which we've been talking about for a long time, right?
Right, right.
The ability to allow ourselves the joy and presence in every moment, but also it's allowing ourselves to experience that void and infinite possibility.
Right, right.
And allow it to be a joyful experience.
Right. Almost like, maybe not necessarily focusing on the judgment of the void, but just the observation of it. And I think that will change the judgment, is when we can get to that place of observation of that void.
Well, and I mean, that's what we end up talking about a lot of these weeks, is the observation of whatever it is, we're talking about. And so there's the observation. And then also I'm feeling like to change the overwhelm, like to a place of allowing yourself to experience it with joy and knowing it's all you. So there's nothing outside of you, right? So there's nothing to be overwhelmed with, because there's nothing that you cannot attain because you already have it. It's just calling it in. And that's a shift in power. That's a huge shift in empowerment, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, that feels really good. All of that.
All
of that in a nice little bow. Right. All right, everyone. So you know what to do. Let's make ourselves comfortable. Take a deep breath. We sit back and close our eyes, and we step out of separation back into wholeness and oneness. And we hold ourselves at the vibration where that is our truth. That is from where we exist, create, and experience. All right. And that took a little bit to settle in, but it felt really good. I mean, in such a different way too. It was like a, oh, I don't know. It ended up being a sitting in a new place, like just sitting what this feels like, and
Right.
in the beginning it was a little panicked, and I heard this collective like, "Ah," and it was like, yeah, no, let's just flow with it.
Right.
Let's sit with it. And so I kept on seeing things sort of unzip and open up. And then it was like all this stuff sort of poured out. And then it just melded beautifully with all this. And it just added so much color and vibrance and, to the whole thing. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And it felt really, and it's funny because a lot of times like, oh, really exciting or whatever. And I was like, no, it just felt like a breath. And
Mhm.
it felt so beautiful and peaceful at the same time. It was very nice. Yeah.
I saw, I think of like when you're skydiving and everybody makes the ring and holds hands and is suspended right there. And I saw one by one, each person say, my focus is no longer fitting in. And they would just let go. And there was that panic of, well, if we all do that, then what's here to anchor this into place? And it was a simple, I let go of my need to fit in, which kind of allowed the changes to happen. And it was like everyone just became just suspended there in their own little section of joy, or however you want to describe it. But it was that letting go of the need to fit in, because that's what holds us in this space. That was just
Nice.
that was great.
Yasmin said it felt amazing. Yeah. In a very unique way too. That felt very different. Nice.
So this week, everybody watching, pay attention to your joys. What brings you joys? Where you limit yourself? Where you hold yourself back from your joys?
Well, and where are you delaying yourself, sacrificing and saying,
Right.
oh, I'll get to this when blah, blah, blah. Or I'll
Right.
do this when I'll only do this when this, right? Because then often it's so funny how it's like we challenge the universe, but we're really just challenging ourselves by saying, well, I'm only going to do this if this happens, or when this happens, or whatever. And it's like, well, but if it brings you joy, why deny it?
Right. Right.
Why deny it? So, and if you allow it without, because then the ego will go, oh, well, we can't afford this, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. It's like, what if I just said yes and allowed it to happen and allowed it to form around me?
Right. And if you know anybody who you feel is experiencing that emptiness or
Feeling lost. Yeah.
that feeling lost, share this.
Yes, please.
Share this and let them participate in this meditation, and let them have that expansion.
Yes.
And that shift.
Yeah. Because the more we do it individually, the more it happens collectively. So
Right.
And the faster we progress down this path together and individually. So
right. And a big thank you to all of those who've already shared our past videos and liked and followed us. Really, really appreciate that.
Yep. So please keep on coming back. Please forward this on to a friend or somebody you know who can benefit. And we will see you next time. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignoni
signing off with this week's Living Ascension. Have a great one, everyone.